I spent the weekend with my male friend who just broke up, but when I got home, my husband did this. I want to start by saying if somebody told me that one weekend away will destroy everything that I've built, I would say, you are absolutely right, crazy. But here I am, with my marriage that is all but over, and my life as miserable as it can be. For starters, it began surprisingly my closest friend, Mark, had what could be described as the worst phase in his existence. He looked like a man on the edge because his wife left him for another man the previous week. I could not sit and watch him to be consumed by sorrow, and that was why I moved to his house during the weekend. What I did for him was the least I could offer him, considering the fact that he has been there for me most of the time. At first, everything seemed fine. I checked in with my husband Chris before I left, and he seemed okay with it, maybe a little distant, but nothing out of the ordinary. I thought I was doing the right thing, but the moment I came back home, everything felt wrong. Chris was cold, and the warmth we'd built in our relationship seemed to have disappeared overnight. I couldn't have imagined that one act of kindness would be the spark that would ignite the flames of everything falling apart. But it did, and now I'm left wondering how it all went so wrong. My name is Sarah. I am 26 years old, and I've been married to Chris for 4 years now. I remember that I had a strong feeling that we were made for each other when we were getting to know one another. He turned out to be the husband I had always dreamt of. He was caring, working, and very motivated in putting up a good life together. In the beginning of our union, he treated me as the most important person in his life. He would come home with things like balloons after work, or write me a love note and leave it on the fridge. Things like, "You can do it." There was a bond, like we stood hand in therefore, we prepared to face any challenge as a team. But as time went on, things started to shift. Chris began focusing more on long-term goals, like saving for a house and planning for our future. I admired his dedication, but I started feeling like the present didn't matter as much to him anymore. He was obsessed with making everything perfect down the line, even if it meant cutting back on things that brought us joy now. One of the first signs that we weren't as happy as we ought to be was when Chris asked where and how I was spending money. He wasn't jealous initially, but he always made me feel that I was wrong for having fun. Going shopping with friends, or just buying something for myself, always evolved into a discussion of its necessity. He'd say, "It's not how much you earn, it's how clear you are on the goals ahead of you." Though I agreed with him, there were moments that it was quite oppressive. Chris's intentions were good. He wanted stability and security for our future family, but it was hard not to feel like he saw me as irresponsible. I began to resent the constant focus on what we shouldn't be doing and started longing for the carefree energy we had before. I wasn't perfect either. I know I pushed back more than I should have. But even then, I never doubted that we loved each other and could work through our differences. Mark, my best friend from college, rang me one day, informing me that his wife wanted a divorce. It took me a few seconds to respond. I first met Mark in college, and he stood by me at every stage of my life, good and bad. He seemed totally exhausted, and the idea of him suffering so much just made me want to dissolve in tears. I informed Chris on my decision to spend the weekend with Mark, and I expected him to be reasonable. But Chris's reaction wasn't what I expected. He wasn't outright angry, but I could tell he didn't like the idea. His questions about why Mark needed me and whether it was appropriate left me feeling defensive. I brushed off his concerns, chalking it up to irrational jealousy. Chris always worried too much, and I didn't think this was any different. I thought I was doing the right thing by being there for a friend. Looking back now, maybe I should have paid more attention to Chris's unease, but at the time, I couldn't see how this one decision would change everything. When I got to Mark's house, I began to appreciate the extent to which he was suffering. His neat, clean-shaven look was gone. His apartment was a wreck, and he looked weak, frail, and exhausted, as if he hadn't slept in days. A reliable friend who always had his life in order. Now Mark was standing in front, appearing lost, and unclear as to where to start with trying to fix his life. Mark's wife, Lisa, had blindsided him. After 10 years of marriage, he discovered that she'd been seeing someone else, a colleague at her office. When he confronted her, she didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she said she wasn't happy anymore, and that she had been feeling trapped in their marriage for years. The betrayal cut him deeply, and as he told me everything, his voice cracked several times. "I gave her everything, Sarah," Mark said while he was looking at the floor. "In the end, she willingly threw everything away from the life I provided for her and the man I was for someone else. He does not even understand what he was wrong about." Hearing the pain in his voice broke my heart. Mark had always been a kind, reliable person. He didn't deserve this. I wanted to say something comforting, but the truth is, I didn't know what to say. I tried to reassure him, telling him that he wasn't to blame, but it felt hollow, like nothing I said could make a difference. And throughout the weekend, we were able to spend hours discussing. This is what Mark said to me. "I sensed for the whole of last year Lisa wanting to turn away from me." She proceeded not to pay attention to conversations, went out a lot more often, and slowly drifted apart. It is worth noting that many of the examples she compiled were rather reminiscent of my own marriage. It was beginning to feel more and more like Chris and I, and as Mark painted a picture of how Lisa gradually became distant and icy, I recalled the distant coldness that was beginning to seep into my relationship with Chris. Mark's pain hit a nerve I didn't expect. I started wondering if Chris felt the same way about me, like I was slipping away, becoming someone he didn't recognize. It wasn't that I'd been unfaithful or that our marriage was falling apart like Mark's, but I couldn't deny that something felt off. Through the days of the weekend, Mark and I realized we are getting used to this pattern. We cooked together, cleaned up his apartment, and then watched some older movies to help him get his mind off things. It was familiar. I could almost say it was friendly. Like after all, we felt we are back to normal, like when we were just friends. One night, after a particularly emotional conversation, we stayed up late talking. The rain was pouring outside, and the apartment felt eerily quiet, except for the sound of the storm. Mark was sitting on the couch, a glass of wine in his hand, and I was curled up in the armchair across from him. "I'm not sure I can do this, Sarah," he whispered. "I know that if I had to start over again, then it would feel like an impossibility." "You can," I said softly. "You're stronger than you think, Mark. You'll get through this." No. He suddenly locked eyes with me, and I felt this sudden weight, some kind of understanding that coursed through me and made me breathless. I couldn't tell whether it was the wine, the hour, or the openness we were at that moment sharing, but everything was slightly off. There was no objectification, no rude gestures, no sexual comments, but it was close enough to make me uncomfortable. I quickly stood up and started gathering the empty glasses. "It's late," I said, trying to break the tension. "We should get some sleep." This time, Mark simply nodded, and after that, his gaze remained on me for a little longer, before he stood up and went to his own room. To think freely and in peace, I got to the guest room, shut the door, and sat on the bed. Part of me wanted to disregard it as nothing, as a moment which arose from lack of sleep and the overwhelming feelings I had at the time. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. I didn't feel guilty, at least, not yet, but I did feel unsettled. I told myself I was just being a good friend, that I had done nothing wrong. Still, the thought of Chris popped into my mind. Would he see this as innocent? Would he understand why I felt the need to be here for Mark? The next day, I shrugged off the moment and tried to concentrate on what I need to do for Mark. The morning was mostly spent unpacking some of Lisa's things, which affected him more than I anticipated was going to happen. Once he came across an old honeymoon photograph of the two of them, and the crying resumed. I put my arms around him when his tears started, but when I tried to console, things were not the same. When the weekend finally ended, I hugged Mark goodbye and promised to check in on him. As I drove home, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief that the weekend was over, guilt for feeling that way, and a lingering unease that I couldn't quite explain. I thought I'd done the right thing by being there for Mark, but a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that maybe I'd crossed a line, even if I didn't mean to. Sweeping the thought aside which tried to engulf me, I stepped into the driveway with the aim of only thinking and concentrating on Chris and our future. But at first I would feel that everything is fine and happy, but suddenly when I arrived home, I knew something was wrong. Chris was at the kitchen table, his face blank, and in that moment, the feeling of something wrong that I was experiencing turned into something much darker, into that sorrow I did not want to experience at all. When I walked through the door, I immediately sensed something was off. The house was too quiet. Chris was sitting at the kitchen table, his arms crossed, staring at the floor. He didn't look up when I came in. Normally, he would greet me with a hug, or at least a smile, but this time, there was nothing. Just silence. "Hello?" I greeted him a little too enthusiastically, my voice shaking just slightly. "I'm back." Chris finally looked up, his expression cold and unreadable. "How's Mark?" he asked, his tone flat. The question was completely unexpected. After thinking for a moment, I replied, "He's okay, I guess. Well, it has been a very difficult time for him, but I think he's going to get through it." Chris nodded slowly, still not breaking eye contact. "I bet it's been rough for him. Rough enough that you thought it was more important to be there for him than to be here." I could almost feel the narrowing of my throat when I heard his words. "Chris, you know why I went? Mark once again required someone, and I could not watch him struggle through everything by himself. You said you understood." "I said I understood," he repeated, his voice rising slightly. "But did you even think about how I felt? Do you know how it felt to be here all weekend, wondering why you're prioritizing another man over your own husband?" I was trying to find words to say something in reaction, but no words came out of my mouth. The word betrayal left an almost palpable cloud over me and refused to be erased. "Chris, it wasn't like that," I said finally, trying to keep my voice calm. "Mark's my friend, you know that. He's been through so much, and I just wanted to help him." Chris then shook his head and laughed bitterly. "Help him? Don't you even know how this looks? You leave all responsibilities behind just to be with him for 2 whole days, and I am allowed to be fine with that? It's not about appearances," I snapped, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "Mark needed me. I wasn't going to let him down just because you're insecure about it." "Insecure?" Chris fired back, namely stood up from the table. "And what do you think this is, insecurity? This is about respect. This is about the fact that for months now, you've been physically distancing yourself from me, and I begin feeling like you don't see me half the time. And now you're running off to play savior for someone else?" His words hit harder than I wanted to admit. I crossed my arms, trying to maintain some semblance of control. "You're overreacting, Chris. Nothing happened, and you know it." "Do I?" he said softly, though there was still an edge to his words. "Do I really know that? Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you've already withdrawn from this marriage a long time ago." I froze, unable to respond. Deep down, I knew there was some truth to what he was saying, but I wasn't ready to face it, not yet. Instead, I defaulted to defensiveness. "You cannot be serious. That is unfair," I protested. "What are you turning this into, or making this? What do you want to transform this into now? I've been here, Chris. I've been trying." "Have you?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. "Because it doesn't feel that way. It feels like you're here physically, but mentally, you're somewhere else entirely. And this weekend just proved it." I catch the guilt that I have been trying to deny for days now, but instead of acknowledging it, I worked hard to hide it from him. "What do you expect me to tell you?" I sighed, anguished, putting my back towards him. "I want you to be honest with me," Chris said, his voice firm. "Why does it feel like I'm the only one fighting for this marriage? Why does it feel like you've already given up?" My hands were in tight fists, and there were tears welling within my eyes. "Well, that's not true," I replied, though deep within I was unsure if what I said was actually true. "I'm trying, Chris. I really am." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You don't see it, do you? You don't see how distant you've been. You don't see how much it's hurting me. And now you expect me to believe that spending the weekend with another man was just about being a good friend?" "It was about being a good friend," I said, my voice rising. "Mark needed me. I wasn't going to abandon him." "And what about me?" Chris shot back. "Do I not need you? Do I not deserve your support, your time, your attention? Or is that reserved for everyone but me?" The room fell silent, his words hanging heavy in the air. I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to defend myself, to explain that I hadn't meant to make him feel this way, but the truth was, I didn't have an answer. Chris finally broke the silence. I don't know what's happening between us, Sarah, but it's not working. And if you can't see that, then maybe you're right. Maybe this marriage isn't as important to you as it is to me. Without another word, he walked past me and headed to the bedroom, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen. I felt a mix of anger, guilt, and sadness swirling inside me, but I couldn't bring myself to follow him. Instead, I stayed there, staring at the empty table, wondering how everything had spiraled so far out of control. The tension between Chris and me had been growing ever since I came back from Mark's place. Every conversation felt strained. Every glance was loaded with unspoken accusations. I tried to act like everything was fine, like we could sweep our problems under the rug and move on, but Chris wasn't letting it go. One evening after dinner, it all came to a head. Chris was unusually quiet, barely touching his food. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, like he was trying to hold back whatever he wanted to say. I finally broke the silence. "Are we really going to sit here and pretend nothing's wrong?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Chris looked up, his expression cold. "I think the real question is, are you going to keep pretending nothing's wrong?" I felt my stomach drop. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You know exactly what it means," he snapped, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. "You've been distant for months, Sarah. You barely talk to me anymore. You shut me out, and now you expect me to believe that spending the weekend with another man was completely innocent?" His words stung, and I felt anger bubbling up inside me. "Mark is my friend, Chris. I've told you this 100 times. Why can't you just trust me?" "Trust you?" he repeated, his voice rising. "How am I supposed to trust you when you prioritize someone else over your own husband? When you disappear for an entire weekend and act like I'm the one with the problem?" "I was helping a friend," I shouted, standing up from the table. "Mark was going through something horrible, and I was just trying to be there for him. Why is that so hard for you to understand?" Chris stood up too, his face inches from mine. "Because it's not just about the weekend, Sarah. It's about everything. You don't see it, but you've been pulling away from me for months. And now I'm supposed to believe there's nothing going on with Mark? Do you even care how that makes me feel?" I felt my throat tighten, but I refused to cry in front of him. "This isn't about Mark," I said through gritted teeth. "This is about you trying to control everything I do. You're the one who's been pushing me away, Chris, not the other way around." His eyes narrowed, and for a moment I thought he might yell back, but instead, he let out a bitter laugh. "You know what? Maybe I am the problem. Maybe I'm the fool for thinking you still care about this marriage." Those words cut deeper than I expected, but instead of softening, I hardened. "You're unbelievable," I said, grabbing my coat. "I'm done having this conversation." "Where are you going?" he demanded. "Out!" I snapped, slamming the door behind me before he could say another word. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to get out of that house, away from Chris and his relentless accusations. My feet carried me to the one place I knew I'd be welcome in Mark's apartment. When I knocked on his door, Mark opened it, looking surprised but not unhappy to see me. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" I needed to get out of the house," I said, my voice trembling. "Chris and I had a fight." He stepped aside, letting me in. "You look like you could use a drink," he said, gesturing to the couch. I sat down, feeling the weight of the evening settle over me. Mark poured me a glass of wine, and we started talking. At first it was about Chris and our argument, but the conversation quickly turned to Mark's own struggles. "I don't know how you do it," I said at one point, my voice thick with emotion. "You've been through so much, and you're still standing. I feel like I'm falling apart." Mark gave me a sad smile. "You're stronger than you think, Sarah. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." There was something in the way he said it, the way he looked at me, that made my heart race. It wasn't just comfort. It felt like something more. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore," I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. Mark reached out, placing a hand on mine. "You're just trying to find your way," he said softly. At that moment, the lines blurred. I didn't think about Chris or the consequences. I didn't think about anything. I leaned in, and Mark didn't pull away. What happened next was impulsive and reckless. It wasn't planned and it wasn't right, but it happened. I crossed a line I never thought I'd cross, and the weight of it hit me the moment it was over. I pulled away, my breath shaky. I shouldn't have. I need to go, I said, grabbing my coat and stumbling toward the door. Sarah, wait, Mark called after me, but I didn't stop. The drive home was a blur. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, and my mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. Guilt washed over me in waves, each one stronger than the last. How could I face Chris after what I'd just done? How could I even look him in the eye? When I got home, the house was dark. Chris was already in bed, and for the first time, I was grateful for the silence. I slipped into the guest room, unable to bear the thought of lying next to him. As I lay there in the darkness, the reality of what I'd done began to sink in. I'd betrayed Chris in the worst way possible, and no matter how much I tried to justify it to myself in the moment, there was no undoing what had happened. The guilt was suffocating, but it was nothing compared to the dread of what would happen when Chris found out. Because deep down, I knew secrets like this never stay buried for long. I thought I could bury what had happened with Mark, but guilt has a way of surfacing in the most unexpected ways. I tried to act normal, but everything about me must have screamed guilt. My nervousness, my refusal to make eye contact, the way I avoided Chris's touch. Chris wasn't stupid. He knew something was off, even if he didn't know what it was yet. It all came to a head one evening when Chris came home early from work. I was in the kitchen, scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself from the weight of my own thoughts. He walked in, looked at me, and then said something that made my blood run cold. "Who's Mark texting you at this hour?" he asked, his voice sharp. I froze, my mind racing. I hadn't realized Mark had messaged me earlier, and I hadn't cleared the notification from my lock screen. Chris had clearly seen it. "It's nothing," I said quickly, shoving my phone into my pocket. Chris's eyes narrowed. "Nothing? You've been acting weird ever since you came back from his place? You avoid me, you barely talk to me, and now you're getting texts from him late at night? What's going on, Sarah?" "Nothing is going on," I insisted, my voice cracking. Chris wasn't buying it. He stepped closer, his voice rising. "Don't lie to me. I've been patient. I've tried to trust you, but this doesn't add up. Did something happen with Mark?" His words hit me like a punch to the gut. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to find a way to deflect, but I was running out of excuses. "Chris, you're overthinking this," I said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to me. "Mark and I are just friends, that's all." "Friends don't act like this," Chris snapped. "Friends don't make you avoid your husband. Friends don't send you texts that make you look like you've seen a ghost. What aren't you telling me, Sarah?" I could see the anger and hurt in his eyes, and it felt like the walls were closing in. I knew I couldn't lie my way out of this, but I wasn't ready to tell the truth either. "Chris, please, can we not do this right now?" I said, trying to walk past him, but he grabbed my arm, his grip firm but not painful. "No, Sarah, we're doing this right now. What happened?" I looked at him, my chest tightening as the words I'd been dreading finally spilled out. "I made a mistake," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Chris's face fell, his anger momentarily replaced by shock. "What kind of mistake?" he asked, though I could see in his eyes that he already knew. Tears streamed down my face as I choked out the words. "It was just one time. I didn't mean for it to happen. I was upset, and I wasn't thinking." "You weren't thinking?" Chris shouted, his voice filled with fury. "You weren't thinking when you betrayed me? When you threw everything we've built away?" "I'm sorry," I sobbed, reaching for him, but he stepped back like my touch burned him. "Sorry?" he spat. "You're sorry? You think that fixes this? Do you even understand what you've done, Sarah? Do you know how much I trusted you, how much I fought for us? And this is how you repay me?" I tried to explain, to make him see that it wasn't about him, that it was my own weakness, my own mistake, but every word I said only seemed to make things worse. "You don't get to blame this on your emotions or a bad night," Chris said, his voice shaking with a mix of rage and despair. "You made a choice. You chose to betray me. You chose to ruin us." "I didn't mean to hurt you," I said desperately. Well, congratulations, he said bitterly, because you've done just that. He turned away, pacing the room like he didn't know what to do with himself. Then, after a long silence, he looked back at me, and I could see the resolve in his eyes. I can't do this anymore, he said, his voice low but firm. What do you mean? I asked, my heart sinking. I mean this marriage is over, he said, his words like a dagger to my chest. I can't stay with someone who doesn't respect me, who doesn't value what we've built. I deserve better than this. Chris, please, I begged, reaching for him again. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. Please don't give up on us. But he shook his head. You already gave up on us, Sarah. The moment you chose someone else over me, you ended this marriage. I just didn't realize it until now. He walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, broken and alone. The weight of what I'd done crashed down on me all at once. I had destroyed the one thing I thought was unshakable, and there was no going back. At that moment, I knew I had lost Chris forever. And the worst part, I had no one to blame but myself. The days after Chris walked out felt like a blur. At first, I held on to a sliver of hope that he would cool down and we could talk things through. I sent him texts, left voicemails, and even drove by his office once, hoping to catch him for just a few minutes. But every attempt was met with silence. Chris wasn't just angry he was done. The reality hit me hard when I received the divorce papers a week later. My heart sank as I read the words on the page. It wasn't just a threat or a moment of anger. Chris was serious about ending our marriage. I tried to reach out one last time, begging him to meet with me so we could talk. But his response was clear and final. There's nothing to talk about, Sarah. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. The man who had once loved me more than anything now wanted nothing to do with me. I couldn't believe it was over, just like that. As the divorce process moved forward, the cracks in my life started to widen. Friends I thought I could lean on began to pull away. Some didn't want to get involved, and others clearly sided with Chris. It wasn't long before I noticed the judgment in their eyes, the whispers behind my back. Even the friends who didn't say anything outright stopped calling, stopped inviting me to things. The loneliness was crushing. I'd always thought of myself as independent, someone who could handle anything life threw at me. But now, without Chris, and without the support of my friends, I felt completely lost. The walls of my apartment, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt cold and suffocating. I had plenty of time to think, really. And with every passing day, the weight of my actions pressed down on me harder. I replayed every argument with Chris, every moment of tension, and most painfully, that night with Mark. What had I been thinking? How could I have let things spiral so far out of control? The worst part was knowing that Chris had been right. I had pulled away from him. I had let my frustrations and selfishness cloud my judgment. Instead of working through our problems, I'd chosen the easy way out, and it had cost me everything. One afternoon, I saw a photo on social media that stopped me in my tracks. It was Chris, smiling, surrounded by a group of friends at a barbecue. He looked truly happy. For a moment, I felt a flicker of relief, thinking maybe he was doing okay. But that relief quickly turned into a deep, aching pain. He was moving on, building a new life without me. And here I was, stuck in the mess I'd created. I started to understand that I wasn't just mourning the loss of Chris. I was mourning the life we had planned together, the home we wanted to buy, the vacations we talked about, the future that now seemed so far out of reach. I had taken it all for granted, and now it was gone. The isolation became unbearable. Nights were the hardest. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything over and over again in my mind. I wanted to believe that things would get better, that I could rebuild my life, but I didn't know where to start. The loneliness, the guilt, and the regret felt like they were swallowing me whole. I realized too late that some mistakes can't be undone. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Chris had been my anchor, and without him, I was adrift. The life I had taken for granted was gone, and the emptiness it left behind was a constant reminder of how far I had fallen. And the cruelest part? I had no one to blame but myself. Update. It's been 6 months since the divorce was finalized. but it feels like a lifetime. Chris has moved on so effortlessly, it seems. I see glimpses of his new life through mutual friends or social media. He's thriving, and it's clear that he's happier without me. The hardest part was seeing a picture of him with someone new. She looked radiant, standing next to him with a smile that mirrored his. They looked like they belonged together, like she fit into the life I was supposed to share with him. I couldn't help but wonder if she was everything I wasn't understanding, supportive, unbroken. It was a painful reminder of how far I had fallen in his eyes. I've spent countless nights replaying everything in my mind, trying to pinpoint the exact moment when I lost him. Was it when I started pulling away emotionally? When do I put my frustrations ahead of our relationship? Or was it that single reckless choice that shattered everything? The truth is, it doesn't matter anymore. I can't undo what I've done. I thought I was justified in supporting my friend, but I let my emotions and selfishness cloud my judgment. I lost sight of what truly mattered, and in the end, I pushed Chris away when he was the one person who always stood by me. I see now that Chris wasn't perfect, but neither was I. He fought for our marriage until the very end, and I didn't. I let resentment fester, and I made choices that I'll regret for the rest of my life. Life after Chris has been empty. I've tried to pick up the pieces, but it's hard when everything reminds me of what I had and lost. The apartment feels too quiet, and the friends I thought would always be there have drifted away. I used to think I was strong enough to handle anything, but losing Chris has shown me just how fragile I really am. The worst part is knowing he's living the life we once planned together, just not with me. The house we dreamed of, the future we talked about, the love we were supposed to share, it's all his now, but I'm not part of it, and I have no one to blame but myself. If I could go back, I'd do everything differently. I'd listen more, fight harder, and appreciate what I had before it was too late. But life doesn't work that way. Some mistakes leave scars that never fade, and some losses can never be undone. I thought supporting my friend was the right thing to do, but I ended up losing everything I cared about. Now, all I can do is live with the pain I created and hope that someday I'll find a way to forgive myself, even if Chris never could.
I am currently regretting every decision I've ever made. Hello, Redditors. I've always been a huge fan of this platform, and now that everything in my life is crumbling, I feel like it is suitable to share my situation here. I am hoping that by speaking up and sharing my story, some of y'all might avoid making the same marriage-scattering mistake I made. Temptation is something we should all avoid. For a few minutes of fun, I've ruined my marriage that took years to build, and I've lost every sense of stability. I cheated on my husband with a younger student of mine at the college where I lecture. This singular mistake of mine has currently torn apart my entire life. I know you're probably wondering about what happened and how it happened. So let me give you my backstory first. My name is Serena, and I am a 45-year-old woman. My husband, Mike, is a 46-year-old man, and we've been married for 23 years. We have two wonderful kids, Damien and Resend. Damien is 21 and Resend is 19. They're both currently away at college. Mike and I met at college. Mike and I first crossed paths in the hustle and bustle of the university library. You know, that place where the air is thick with the smell of old books and dreams of the future. I was knee-deep in my love affair with literature, lost in the magic of words sprawled across pages. Mike, this curious guy with a spark in his eye, noticed me engrossed in my reading. Our initial interactions were more like quiet smiles and shared glances amidst the sea of books. Slowly but surely, our late-night coffee breaks turned into conversations, and those stolen glances during lectures became the highlight of my day. Lowell, when I started college, I was all about being super serious. You know, no time for romance, just books and lectures. That was the plan. But then along came Mike, this dude who practically radiated happiness. Always smiling, super kind, the whole package. At first I resisted it. I was like, nope, staying focused here. But Mike was relentless. His laughter could turn the most me day into something special. He had this way of making life feel lighter, like he held the secret to enjoying every little moment. Mike seemed to have cracked the code of perpetual happiness. Always with that infectious smile, He had this gentle and kind aura that melted away my well-intentioned walls. In the beginning, I fought against it, reminding myself of my initial pact with academia. I tried to stick to my no love, just study rule, but Mike's easygoing vibe and genuine joy started breaking down my defenses. It was like he had this magical power to turn seriousness into laughter and make every day a bit brighter. Mike was like a persistent ray of sunlight. He warmed his way into my heart. His laughter was contagious, capable of turning the gloomiest day into a joyous adventure. Gradually, I found myself drawn to his easygoing nature and the simple joy he found in every moment. It was as if he held the key to a world where seriousness was replaced by laughter and warmth. So, despite my best efforts, love crept in, and suddenly, my heart wasn't following the academic script I had planned, the strict study-only policy I had set for it. Mike's charm flipped my college journey into an unexpected adventure of laughter and warmth. Love happened, and it was a surprise that made those study-only intentions fly right out the window. Against my initial resolve, I started to see the beauty in letting someone in. Our first date wasn't your usual fancy dinner or movie night. Mike decided we should have a spontaneous picnic in the park at sunset. It might sound cliché, but trust me, Mike had a talent for making the ordinary super special. We walked through the park, carrying blankets and a basket filled with all sorts of snacks. Mike's excitement rubbed off on me, and I couldn't help but get into the spirit. We found a spot under a big oak tree that seemed just right. What made the picnic awesome was the surprise element. Instead of regular sandwiches, Mike brought out a mix of international snacks: Thai noodles, French pastries, and some weird fruit I couldn't pronounce. It was like a mini world tour for our taste buds, right there on the blanket. As we munched on the goodies, Mikey told hilarious stories that had us both cracking up. He had this knack for turning everyday stuff into something funny. Time seemed to stand still, just us, the sound of leaves and distant city noise. Then we had an unexpected dance party with just Mike and I in attendance, LOL. Mike pulled out a tiny speaker, and a sweet tune started playing. He grinned and, like a pro, asked me to dance. We twirled around under the stars, laughing and having a blast. It felt like a scene from a feel-good movie. But wait, there was more. Mike handed me a small, fancy-looking package. I opened it to find a glow-in-the-dark frisbee. He remembered me mentioning how I liked playing frisbee in the evenings. The fact that he remembered and turned it into a surprise was just so sweet. We ended up throwing the frisbee in the semi-darkness, missing catches and laughing like crazy. We didn't care if we looked silly. It was about enjoying the moment together. I remember thinking, this is the kind of date you remember forever. As the night wound down, we lay on the blanket, staring at the stars. Mike shared his dreams, and I shared mine. It was a level of honesty and connection that felt real. Our first date wasn't just fun. It was a sneak peek into the kind of relationship where you can be yourself. I went home that night with a heart full of laughter, a glow-in-the-dark frisbee, and this feeling that I'd just had a seriously amazing time. Mike had this way of turning a regular evening into an unforgettable adventure, and remember feeling that this was the kind of person I'd want to spend the rest of my life with. Deciding to tie the knot before completing college was a wild move, but for Mike and me, it felt like the right kind of crazy. Mike's parents, though well off, were surprisingly laid back and adored me. On the flip side, my family couldn't get enough of Mike. So, despite the unconventional timing, we took the plunge into marriage. The decision to get married wasn't about throwing a grand affair. We opted for a small church ceremony with only a handful of people invited. It raised a few eyebrows considering Mike's wealthy background, but what folks didn't know was that it was exactly what I wanted. Something private and intimate. Walking down the aisle in that small church, the air felt charged with excitement and a bit of disbelief. The intimate setting surrounded by our closest loved ones made it feel like it was just us, promising forever. Mike's parents, the coolest, most easygoing people ever lol, cheered us on, while my family beamed with joy. Our vows were exchanged in a space filled with love and support. far away from the grandeur one might expect from a family with Mike's financial standing. The choice for a more modest celebration wasn't about avoiding extravagance. It was about authenticity, about the simplicity of our commitment to each other. The reception that followed was a cozy gathering filled with laughter, shared stories, and heartfelt toasts. It wasn't the opulent affair one might associate with a wealthy family, but it was perfect for us. We danced, laughed, and celebrated the start of our journey together, surrounded by the warmth of our closest friends and family. Our decision to marry before finishing college might have seemed impulsive to some, but for us, it was a declaration of love and commitment that defied societal expectations. Love knows no perfect timing. Also, looking back, our small wedding in that quiet church remains a cherished memory. It wasn't about the size of the guest list or the extravagance of the event. It was about two people choosing each other, surrounded by the love of those who mattered most. And in that simplicity, we found the foundation for our love story. You know, they say you never know what you have till it's gone. I never knew how precious and important Mike was to me until I lost him all because of some fun. The transition from college to whatever came after was another whole chapter for Mike and me. Graduation was looming, and we were headed in different directions, driven by our unique dreams. For me, teaching was the goal. It wasn't just a job, it was a passion. I wanted to be in a classroom, helping students grow. Mike, on the other hand, had a more laid-back approach to college. He was set to inherit the family business and become the big-shot CEO LOL, and he also had a trust fund waiting for him. College, for him, was more about the experience, the parties, the friendships, and the whole shebang. Our talks about life after college highlighted the gap between our plans. I was all about education, wanting to make a difference in the lives of students. Mike, on the flip side, was cool with life unfolding naturally, knowing his future was somewhat set. The contrast in our college experiences and post-graduation plans didn't mess with the bond we built during those years. Moving from college to the real world brought a mix of excitement and nerves. I went job hunting, hoping to find my place in the education scene. Meanwhile, Mike smoothly transitioned into the CEO role, handling the business world like a pro. Our post-college journeys took us in different directions, but our connection stayed strong. Living together as a married couple, we supported each other through the highs and lows. I found my groove in teaching, while Mike tackled the complexities of running a business. And a bunch of years passed since Mike and I left college. I was now a successful professor teaching at a college that I cannot name due to privacy, and Mike was CEO of his family's business. Our kids were also off in another state, tackling their own college adventures, lol. And you know what? Life, despite all the success, started having this nagging feeling of routine, the everyday grind, the comfortable rhythm of our marriage. It started to feel like a broken record. With the kids off doing their thing, I was always bored, wondering what came next. All the wins and achievements that should have made me feel on top of the world weren't shielding me from the creeping boredom. The excitement we had in the early days has mellowed into a kind of peaceful but dull routine. Mike's CEO life kept him busy, dealing with board meetings and business trips, and sometimes it felt like we were in different worlds. And then there was also the fear of getting old. The little signs like a wrinkle here and a gray hair there made me realize we were not the college kids anymore. Life had thrown us responsibilities, and it was messing with who I thought I was. It's not that I'm unhappy with Mike or the life we built. It's just this itch for more. Personal growth, rediscovering what makes me tick. The success that defined us seems to have dimmed the spark that kicked off our journey together. Years roll by, I'm still just there doing some soul searching. I was respected and successful, but still, yet I felt so bored. Our life, the careers, the pride in our kids, all awesome stuff. But the itch for something more won't shut up. It started pushing me to shake things up, to find a new groove. It was at a point where I needed to talk to Mike, to understand each other, and maybe take on new adventures, together or on our own. A chance to rediscover and renew ourselves. But I never talked to Mike. That was where I was stupid. Mike was the most understanding person I knew. If only I had talked to him, he would have listened. He would have tried, he would have fought for us, but I didn't talk to him. I left everything inside me and pretended as if I was fine. And as if to destroy everything I had built in years, the devil Lowell sent a person named Jake. Jake was the biggest mistake I made. Let me tell you about Jake. He was 20 years old and he was a student in some of my classes. I say was because even though I haven't been called in by the board to explain myself, I'm pretty sure that I am losing my job over this mistake. Now, like I previously said, Jake was a student in some of my classes. He stood out because he was very good-looking and very charismatic. I noticed that a lot of the students liked Jake because he was funny and handsome and also smart. Jake was the kind of student that was in everyone's good books. Initially, I didn't notice him much or pay much attention to him, other than observing the fact that he was intelligent and also handsome. He also reminded me of my kids, as my kids were smart and also very good-looking. They were also very charismatic. And there was a running joke in the house that our kids could take down a monkey from a tree, lol. Either ways, I only started to notice Jake when he started interacting with me more. He would stay after lectures were over and ask if he could help me or something. He would ask to help me with virtually anything I needed help with, be it grading another class's test or carrying some of my things to the car. He was generally very helpful, or at least that's how it seemed to me. Jake was a very manipulative person, but it wasn't something I really noticed then, as I was entranced by him. Soon Jake and I were talking more. We would have conversations and defend our points of views. For example, he believed that Socrates did not exist and that he must have just been a figment of Plato's imagination, while I, on the other hand, believed that Socrates must have existed, and just because there was no record of his existence apart from Plato's notes didn't mean he did not exist. It was obvious pretty quick that Jake wanted something more. That was the time where I should have shut him down. But I kept encouraging him, talking to him, having him help me, and pretend as if I didn't know that he wanted more. Soon, Jake and I were hanging out more outside lecture hours, and soon we were getting intimate. He said he didn't care about my age, and told me that I was beautiful, no matter how old I was. I was flattered and entranced by the fact that someone as handsome as Jake, who every girl in the campus had a crush on, actually liked me. We were soon getting intimate a lot in my office after lecture hours. I couldn't take Jake to my home because Mike had an irregular schedule. Even though he was always busy, you could never know when he would be free and at home. He could be in Italy for a business trip, and in a few hours' time, he would tell you that he was flying back home. Sometimes he wouldn't even tell you he was coming so as to surprise you. I was too scared and horrified by the prospect of Mike coming home and finding me and Jake together. Even more so, my kids had inherited Mike's habits of not informing anybody before coming home. So sometimes you would think that they were in school, and lo and behold, they would be on the next flight home without even telling anybody. I didn't want my kids coming home to surprise me and meeting me and Jake intimate, as that would probably scar them for life, so I resorted to my office and hotels. Jake and I mostly preferred my office, as we could be intimate immediately after lectures had ended and everyone had left. I even started staying at work late and telling Mike I had to work overtime when he was at home just so I could spend time with Jake at the office. Honestly, during my whole time of doing this, I felt very guilty. I loved Mike a lot and couldn't imagine my life without him. But I also wanted some excitement in my life, and Jake could provide that excitement as he was young and active. Mike's business was very successful, but that also left us with little time for each other. I could barely remember the last time we had a whole day to each other. Mike planned on slowly retiring, though, when our oldest Damien was done with college and Mike could slowly pass the mantle of CEO onto him. There were times when I would sometimes have nightmares of Mike finding out and confronting me, or even coming to see me at the university and stumbling onto me and Jake intimate. I would dream about Mike screaming at me, asking me how I could cheat on him. To be honest, I should have taken those dreams seriously and maybe stopped cheating while I was still ahead and Mike was still in the dark, but I didn't, LOL. I even thought the dreams were only coming as a result of me being scared of Mike finding out. Well, on the day when it all blew up in my face, I was at the university. I had just finished up a lecture about an hour ago, and Jake and I were being intimate. Mike had already texted me that he would soon be home in a few hours, so I planned to finish up with Jake and then go back home in a few hours to meet Mike, as I had missed him. I noticed that my kids had given me a few missed calls. Damien had called me 5 times, and Reese had called me 7 times. but I didn't pay it too much mind. In the house, we had a rule that if it's very urgent, text about it. This was because sometimes we would be too busy to pick a call. But we could take a quick glance at our phone if it was a text. Also, Damien and Rezand could call you a billion times for the smallest things. LOL. So texting just worked better. I planned to call them back when I was frightened later in the evening because I knew if it was a very huge emergency, one of them would have texted since. I soon finished up with Jake, dropped him off, and then headed home. I was so happy to see Mike. I didn't even pay attention to his countenance. I made us dinner, and then we sat down to watch a movie and discuss stuff. All of a sudden, Mike asked me if I had checked my Instagram and that he had tagged me on a post. I was a bit surprised as Mike wasn't really an Instagram person, but sometimes or occasionally, he would tag me under funny posts or something he felt he wanted me to see, or he would save and send the post to me. I told Mike I would check the post later, but he insisted on it and said he wanted me to check it now, so I opened up my Instagram and went all the way to my notifications. I immediately noticed that Mike wasn't the only one that had tagged me. My kids had also tagged me as I recognized their Instagram handles. My kids were something of Instagram influencers, and I followed them. I clicked on the post, and what I saw shocked me. It was a photo of me and Jake in a hotel room. It was obvious that we had just been intimate, and I looked as if I was sleeping in the photo. And even worse, Jake had been the one to post the photo. Not just that, in the caption, he had also bragged about being able to sleep with his lecturer, and the post was viral. I was shocked. I was horrified. I didn't even know what to do. It was as if time froze. Mike was staring at me, and it was obvious he had already seen the post. I noticed that my kids had also tagged him along with me on the post. Now I knew why my kids had been calling me. What would I tell everyone? The photo that Jake posted was so compromising that it was obvious what was going on, and I wouldn't even be able to lie about it. Mike had gotten up from the couch by now and was heading out. I tried to call out to him, but he stormed out. He was no longer calm and pretending as if everything was fine. I tried calling Mike after he left, but he wouldn't pick up. My kids also tried calling me again and even texted me. At that point, even my in-laws and family members had started calling me. It was as if everyone has stumbled on the post. I still tried reaching Mike, but all to no avail. But all I got back from him was a single text that by the time he came back in an hour or so, he wanted me out of the house. Now I've been married to Mike for a long time, and I know him like the back of my hand, so I knew that that was no empty threat. Mike was the kindest person that I knew, but when he got angry, he could do the craziest things. He never made empty threats, and if he promised to do something, he always went ahead with it no matter what. So I packed up just my clothes and essentials and left the house. I headed to my parents' house, and when I got there, I owned up to my mistake and told them what happened. They were angry, of course, but they couldn't abandon me in my time of need, so they took me in. As for my kids, it was as if the more I refused to pick their calls out of fear, the angrier they got. Soon, they had both sent me a text explaining that the thing with Jake was actually a game. Jake had been asked to pick a lecturer he would like to be intimate with, and he had chosen me. Jake had also boasted and told them to give him a few months, and that he would have me eating out of the palm of his hand soon enough. Of course, my kids hadn't experienced this firsthand as they were out of state for college, but they said that they had gotten this story from a very reliable person who was there at the party when Jake said it. I was so shocked to hear that, but suddenly it started to make sense. That was where all of a sudden Jake, who had never interacted much during lectures, apart from answering questions, when I asked, suddenly started helping me after lectures. I felt like a fool, and worse of all, I felt used. Mike still wasn't accepting my calls, so I decided to finally pick my kids' call. I couldn't tell them much as I didn't even have an excuse, so all I could do was apologize and cry. I begged them to help me, beg Mike. But they said that their dad was really hurt and that they weren't sure he would listen to anybody now. They felt so disappointed in me and said they felt so ashamed as a lot of people had tagged them under the post and a lot of people had recognized me. That is currently my situation now. I still haven't talked to my in-laws, but I know that they must be very disappointed in me. My parents are also very disappointed and saddened, and worst of all, my kids are shattered. The only communication that has gone on between Mike and me is him sending me a quick text, telling me that we would be getting a divorce. I feel shattered, I regret everything, and if I could go back in time, I would definitely do everything different. I'm posting this here, hoping that someone doesn't make the same mistake that I did. Thanks for listening.